So in this video I'm going to talk about the front cross member, which is what holds the bumper on, and specifically about a repair that I've conducted to the end of the cross member at the back on the driver's side. So the front cross member holds the bumper on via 4 brackets. You've got 2 at the front, one here, another one that would be here had I not taken it off, and then 2 at the side that come through the outer wing, and then on the other side where it's off the car, and the bracket mounts up to the side like that and then comes through the outer wing where it's there on this side. Now, like many parts of this car, the front cross member is a bit of a rust trap, and I think the basic problem is that water gets inside it and doesn't really escape properly, and the member is formed. You've got a sort of a rear pressing and then you've got a front pressing, and it's all joined together. You've got this seam that goes all the way along the front, and as you can see, there are a few places along here where water's obviously attacked the seam from the inside and it's just slowly starting to push it apart. Now, when I first looked at the car, particularly because of what was going on around the mounting points where it is spot welded to the chassis rail, I was a bit fearful that we'd have to separate the front cross member and possibly even replace it. Now, having thought about it, I don't think I'm going to do that, because although this seam is a bit damaged by the corrosion in 1 or 2 places, it is still, in my opinion, fundamentally sound. And with a program of rust treatment and future prevention, I reckon we can save it and prevent it from deteriorating any further. Now, specifically, what I discovered though is that where it did need a bit of reinforcement was round the back here, because while I was working on the inner wing and the chassis leg here, I took this bracket off in order so that it stopped getting in the way, and I discovered that the back of this outer bit of the cross member where the mount bolts are was completely rusted out, and if it wasn't addressed, eventually the side bumper bracket will have just fallen off the back of it, and that would have let the side of the bumper hang loose. So this is what I did to remedy.
So originally I thought I might be able to get away with just cutting around one of the threads, the outer one, but as I got more into it, it became obvious that the metal on the entirety of the back was compromised, and I would have to cut out around both threads and weld in a plate of new metal and reattach the threads to the back. So after having made an initial cut in the back of the cross member around one of the threads, I realised there was so much loose rust inside the cross member that I was going to have to get in there and find a way of sucking it out. So what I did was I cut a hole, a slightly larger hole, around one of the pressing holes in the front of the cross member and fed a garden hose inside attached to the hoover. So by getting all that loose rust out, that would mean that later on, when I applied frame coating to the inside, it would actually stick and be effective. So this was the cutout I eventually ended up with at the back of the cross member, and I then cut up with the angle grinder a piece of 2mm steel plate to weld in to replace it. It was obviously important to get the dimensions of the plate and the location of the holes correct. Obviously, the cutout was not going to be exactly square with the best will in the world. So what I did was, with the plate in place and held in place by magnets, I very carefully measured by reference to measurements I'd taken earlier before making the cut, how far each hole should be from the bottom of the cross member, and also with reference to the pressing hole just to the left of it at the back, and also how far apart the holes should be, such that I marked 2 correct locations to drill the new holes.
So, got the plate, zinc primer on the back. The nuts and bolts have been in the rust bath. Unfortunately, one of them I think is going to have to be replaced. You see that one? The top of the thread there is just gone. And unfortunately, that's something the rust bath can't really do anything about. So the other one's okay though, which is good because I'll order another one of these. This one though is okay, and I need it really to weld the nut accurately in place through the hole. I've bolted it on, and that will just make sure that the bolt is in the right place, that the hole lines up with the nut behind it, and then I'll just weld around the bottom, and all being well, that won't penetrate through to the bolt, so I can then unbolt it, and I'll then do the other one, weld it all up. And obviously I don't actually need this replacement bolt until I come to bolt the bracket back onto it, which at the moment I'm nowhere near doing, so I still need to clear out the whole area on the inside of the wheel arch. So I'll get a replacement for that, but in the meantime just use that to weld on the 2 nuts there.
So this is where my newly created welding bench came in very handy. I'd essentially put a 3mm steel top on one of my existing workbenches, and using my little Eastwood magnets to hold the plate in place, it was quite a handy way of welding around the nuts onto the back of the plate. So this is the new plate welded into the back of the cross member. I think if I'd been starting the repair again at this point, I probably would have cut out a little bit more than I had, because the thickness of the cross member metal in 1 or 2 places, particularly on the top, was a bit thinner than I'd initially realised. But the integrity of the weld seemed okay. It was a little bit porous in 1 or 2 places, but I decided just to go over it with a very thin skim of body filler just to seal up any pinholes that I couldn't necessarily see, because you're not obviously able to get a torch inside the cross member. At least I don't have one that will fit inside, so the sort of normal way of finding pinholes couldn't really apply. But anyway, a very light skim of body filler to me is a perfectly acceptable way of finishing the repair. So to finish the repair, I used some of Eastwood's internal frame coating and a long spray tube attachment to frame coat the inside of this side of the cross member. Obviously you can see I've welded up the cutout around one of the pressing holes in the front of the member, and I just used that factory hole to feed the tube through and get a nice coating, hopefully all the way through the inside, did one coating and then came back a few hours later to do a second one, and then used essentially some of the access holes for the little screw clips, things like that, just to peek through with the torch and just check as far as I could that the back of the weld had been coated. So also for good measure, I just fed the tube through the threads as well, just to make sure that the frame coating was, as much as possible, was on the back of the new metal. So I'll leave it there for now. The longer term plan for all these kind of areas inside the wing, the front cross member, the inside of the engine bay, is to go over with a 2K body colour paint. But obviously that's some way away yet, because I kind of want to do it all in one go. Essentially at the moment I'm just using relatively basic 1K primers and top coats just to protect the repairs before going over with the 2K products later on in the future. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting, and stand by for more R107 restoration.